The first thing Banjo did when the porch light flicked on was bark at the bottom of the steps, and the second thing he did was refuse to come up them. That was unusual enough that I noticed it through the screen door, but not unusual enough to make me put down the bowl I was drying. He's a 6-year-old shepherd and something mix, mostly black with a tan saddle across his back and one ear that never learned to stand all the way up, and he barks at things. That's most of what there is to say about Banjo. He barks at the recycling truck on Tuesdays. He barks at the Pomeranian 2 doors down on Quail Run, who he has never once been allowed to meet and never will be, by the look the Pomeranian's owner gives us. He barks at deer crossing the back third of the lot, where the grass goes wild against the fence line. And then he barks at the smell of the deer for an hour after the deer have wandered off into the trees. So a dog barking in the yard at dusk in late April is about the most ordinary sound a house out on the edge of Pell County can make. And for the first long while I treated it like exactly that, which is to say I barely treated it at all. Banjo, hey, up. I said it the way you'd say it 100 times in a week, half a word and a flat voice, not even turning around. And I went back to the bowl and the towel. He didn't come. The light over the back steps is one of those motion sensor jobs my father-in-law put in years ago, before the stroke took the strength out of his right side and most of the words out of his mouth, back when he still climbed ladders and complained about the price of everything. It throws a yellow that's gone a little orange with age, the bulb getting tired, and it clicks when it switches on. An actual mechanical tick you can hear from the kitchen if the water's off. It had clicked. So Banjo had moved down there, or something near him had moved, enough to trip the sensor, and now the dog was standing in that tired orange light with his front feet planted square and his head dropped low between his shoulders, barking at the dark past the edge of the yard. I dried the bowl and set it in the rack and picked up the next one. The kitchen smelled like the inside of the dishwasher when you open it a minute too soon, that hot plastic and lemon soap smell, and under it the chicken thighs we'd had for supper, and under that, the particular old paper smell the whole house has carried since we pulled the wallpaper off the hall and found 3 older layers of it behind, going back to whoever built the place in the 20s. I had the radio going low on the counter, KPWL out of the county seat, the little AM station that does the swap and shop in the mornings and high school ball games at night, and a man named Roy Tillman who reads the obituaries and the school lunch menu in the same slow voice, like the dead and the Salisbury steak carry the same weight, which to Roy I believe they do. The ball game had stopped. I'd like to tell you I caught that the moment it happened, but I didn't. I caught it the way you catch your own breathing once somebody points it out, which is backward, after the fact. The dog was barking, and the radio had slid into that low murmur of talk that isn't a song and isn't play-by-play. And I had a wet bowl in my hands. And somewhere toward the back of the house a toilet ran and then shut off, which meant Dolores was up out of her chair and moving around, which she does in the evenings, restless, opening cabinets she's already checked. Then Banjo's bark changed, and that I did catch. Not louder. I'd have noticed louder and ignored it. It dropped. It went down into his chest where he keeps the sound he made the one time a man came to our door after dark to tell us our mailbox was lying flat in the road, knocked off the post by somebody's truck. The man had been perfectly polite, apologetic even, but Banjo had not believed a word of him, and he'd made that low chest sound the whole time the man stood on the porch. That sound. 3 of them now, spaced out, with a gap between each one like the dog was leaving room for an answer he expected to come. I put the bowl down on the counter. Easy. I went to the screen door and looked out, and the yard was just the yard. The orange light, The two concrete steps and the pad below them. The dog. The dark line of the fence. The wild grass past it going gray as the last of the day drained out of the sky. The big silver maple. The clothesline I keep meaning to take down because nobody's hung a thing on it since Carol's mother passed. Beyond our fence, past our acre and a half, the Patel place sat dark against the tree line, and past that the land rolled down toward the river road and the town. And you can't see the road itself from the back step, only sometimes the wash of headlights thrown up against the underside of the clouds. There were no headlights against the clouds. There hadn't been, I realized, in a while. "Banjo, come on, buddy, come up." I slapped my thigh twice, the "come here," and he turned his head and looked back at me over his shoulder, and then turned away and barked again, that low one, and stayed put. That was the second wrong thing, if you're counting, which I wasn't yet. He always comes when there's a person at the door, because to Banjo, a person at the door is the entire reason a dog has ears. For him to keep his back to me, to keep his face pointed at the fence I'd seen that maybe twice in 6 years. Once was a buck that stood its ground instead of bolting. Once was a coyote that got into the Henderson's chicken run up the road, and Banjo could smell the blood of those hens for 2 days after and wouldn't quit working the fence line. I let it go. I want to put that plainly, because everything that came after grew out of it. I let the dog bark, and I left him to it. And I went down the hall to check on Russ, my father-in-law, who'd called out something through his door that I couldn't shape into a word. His TV was on, the volume cranked up the way he likes it now, and he was sitting forward in the recliner with the remote held out in his good left hand, pointing it at the screen and pressing the channel button over and over, and the screen kept showing him the same thing no matter what he pressed. "Russ, what do you need? What's the matter?" He looked at me, and his face did the thing it does when the words are right there, but the bridge across to them has washed out. Frustration with no language to carry it. He stabbed the remote at the TV again. Pressed the button, same channel. "It won't change?" I took the remote out of his hand and pressed it myself, and the channel changed just fine, to a cooking show, a woman flouring a board, and Russ made a sharp, angry sound, and jabbed his finger at the screen and then back at me, and I changed it back. And slowly I understood that it wasn't the channel not changing that had him worked up. It was that every channel he landed on was showing some version of the same picture, and he wanted me to find the one that wasn't. And there wasn't one. It was the city affiliate. The station out of the city 40 miles off. The one with the weatherman Russ has never trusted. A woman sat at the anchor desk with her hands folded on top of a stack of paper she wasn't reading from, and the band of text under her chin said something I read and didn't take in, the way you don't take in a chyron. And she was saying the name of a hospital, Mercy something, Mercy General, the big one off the interstate. She said the words, "advised to avoid the area," and then she said, "We're getting," and stopped, and put 2 fingers to her ear, and the way she stopped was the third wrong thing. She started over, and her whole voice had changed, gone slow and careful, the way you talk when you're reading something for the first time as it's handed to you, and you don't trust it. We want to be careful here. We're being told that the situation at Mercy General involves injuries to hospital staff, and that residents in the surrounding area are being asked to. And then she looked off to the side of the camera, at somebody, and did not finish the sentence, and the station cut away to a wide helicopter shot of the hospital at dusk. Just a building with its lights coming on and a parking lot full of cars stopped at wrong angles, doors open on some of them. A man's voice came over the shot. Not her voice, reading a phone number twice. Slow. The way you read a number to somebody who's writing it down. Russ smacked the arm of the recliner with his good hand. I don't know either, Russ. I don't know. I gave him the remote back and he held it but didn't point it anywhere. Probably some you know how they get. 3 cars knock fenders in a parking lot and it's the lead story for a week. Let me go check on the dog and I'll come back and we'll find your show. Outside, Banjo had stopped barking. That should have been a relief. It wasn't. The quiet had a shape to it. An after-quiet. The kind that follows a sound rather than just an absence of one. I went to the kitchen and stood at the screen, and the orange light was still burning, which meant something down there was still moving enough to keep tripping it, and the dog was standing in exactly the spot he'd been in, at the foot of the steps, but his posture had changed. His head was up now. Both ears were up, even the bad one that never stands, straining forward. And he wasn't barking. He was listening. A dog that has been barking at the dark and then goes silent. And listens is a worse thing than a dog that keeps barking. And anybody who's lived with a dog knows it in their stomach. What is it? It wasn't really a question. I pushed the screen open and came down the 2 steps onto the pad in my sock feet. And the concrete was cold and a little damp, the way it gets these spring evenings when the days run warm and the ground hasn't caught up to them. The air smelled green, somebody's grass cut earlier in the day. And under the green, the river smell coming up the draw with the south wind, mud, and rot, and old wet leaves. Banjo's tags clinked once when he checked over his shoulder that I'd come down, and then he faced the fence again. Out past the fence, in the wild grass, something was standing up. I couldn't see it well. The light didn't reach that far. It just made the near grass orange and let the far grass go black. It was a paleness and an uprightness where everything else was dark and low. And the first thing my mind did, automatic, was make it a deer, because a deer is what stands up pale at the edge of that field. Except a deer doesn't stand square on to you, doesn't sway side to side like a man who's had too much to drink and is working up the nerve to walk. And a deer's pale parts aren't up that high off the ground. Hello? I called it the way you call it when you've half decided it's the Patel's boy home from college and turned around in the dark. Or a hunter who's lost the property line, or anybody at all. Any ordinary person who's going to answer and turn the whole evening back into nothing. You all right out there? This is private property, but if you need a phone... Banjo's bark came out of him like a cough, hard and sudden, and he took 2 stiff legs toward the fence and stopped. The pale shape didn't answer. It moved, though. It came a step forward through the grass toward the fence, and the orange light caught the side of a face for half a second. And it was a person. Just a person. A man in a light-colored shirt. And I had a whole sentence ready about how he was welcome to come use the phone if he'd gotten himself into some trouble. And the sentence died in my throat, because the man walked into the fence. Not up to it. Into it. He hit the top wire, and the corner post took the weight, and groaned and leaned, and he didn't stop. His legs kept going, his shirt pressed into the wire, and his face turned up and away at an angle, and he made no sound. None. Not a grunt or a curse or any of the noises a man makes when he walks into a fence in the dark. He just kept walking into it like the fence was a thing he hadn't been told about yet. Hey, whoa, hey, stop! I had Banjo by the collar before I knew I'd reached for it. The leather was warm from his neck. He was shaking, not with fear, with the strain of holding himself back. Every muscle in him pulled toward that fence and held by the one thread in him that still listened to me. I'll tell you what I thought, because it matters and because it's foolish. I thought stroke. I thought the man was having one, the way Russ had, or a seizure, or that he was drunk past the point of working right. Those were the doors my mind knew how to open. The door marked "Nothing you have ever seen" was not a door I was going to look at, let alone open, not yet. So I built a sick man out of him instead. A sick man who needed help, because being useful to a sick man was a thing I knew how to do. I've spent 20 years standing close to people, my hands on their heads, hearing about their gallbladders and their grandkids and their bad hips. People I knew how to read. Banjo, sit, stay. I pushed his back end down, and he sat, every part of him humming, and I went toward the fence with my hands out a little in front of me low, the way you walk up on a spooked horse, and then I said, "Sir, I think you're hurt. Just hold still. I'm going to call somebody to come help you." And the man hung up on the fence turned his face all the way toward me for the first time. His eyes were open, and they were wrong. Not bloody, not anything a movie would put on him. They were just pointed at me with nobody behind them. The flat, aimed look a doll gives you, and his mouth was working, chewing on nothing. And there was something dark down the whole front of the light shirt that I had been telling myself was a shadow, and that I could no longer tell myself was a shadow. I stopped about 6 feet short of the fence. He came over it, not climbed. The leaning post finally gave and the top wire dropped under his weight, and he folded over it and hung there a second with his arms reaching down into our yard. And then his own weight carried him the rest of the way over, and he came down face first on our grass, with a sound like a 50-pound sack of feed dropped off a tailgate. And the part of me still building a sick man kept building, kept saying he's fallen. He's hurt himself worse now. Right up until he got his hands flat under him and pushed his face up out of the grass and started to crawl toward me. Fast, faster than a hurt man crawls, faster than I'd have believed a body could move on its hands and knees. And the chewing mouth was making a sound now, a dry pulling click of air through a throat, and Banjo broke his stay. He put himself between me and the thing in the grass, and he went off like I have never in my life heard a dog go off, before or since. I went backward up the steps. I'm not proud of the order things happened in that the dog moved to put his body in the gap, while I was still rearranging the shape of the world in my head. But that's the order, and I won't dress it up. Banjo planted himself at the bottom of the steps and roared. That's the only word for it. Deep and unbroken with a tearing edge at the top of it, lunging in and snapping his teeth a foot short of the crawling face and dancing back, lunging again, and the thing on the grass did not react to the dog at all. It came toward the noise, toward us. And I understood with my body, before my head caught up, that the dog was the loudest thing in the yard, and the thing in the grass was coming to the loudest thing it could find. "Banjo, up, get up here!" I had the screen door hauled open, and I had both hands in his collar dragging, and he wouldn't break off. He would not turn his back on it, and the thing got a hand up onto the bottom step. A pale hand on the step. Fingers, a gold wedding band, and a wristwatch with the face turned around to the inside of the wrist, the way some men wear them so it won't scratch on things. And I knew that watch. I'd like to say I didn't, but I did, even then, even in all of it. The barber's eye that holds on to the small particular facts about men. The man whose hand was on my step wore his watch turned in because he stood at a register all day, and the buckle scratched the counter. And his name was Dale Foster, and he ran the feed and farm store out on Route 9 and had for as long as I'd been grown. The knowing of it went through me cold, and did not help one single bit. I got one arm all the way around Banjo's chest and lifted him, all 60-some pounds of him fighting me, Up the 2 steps and through the door, and in the thrashing, his teeth caught the meat of my forearm. Not a bite. His jaw working in the chaos and finding skin, a scrape that beat it up red. I shoved him inside and yanked the screen, and then the main door shut and threw the deadbolt. And through the door I heard the thing that had been Dale Foster come up the steps and hit the wood. Not a knock. A press. A slow, heavy lean, like it meant to walk through the door the same patient way it had walked through the fence. Banjo flung his whole body at the door from the inside and barked. "Stop! Stop! Stop! Easy, please!" I was down on my knees with both arms around him, trying to fold the sound back into his chest against me, and he wouldn't be folded. He twisted free and stood square to the door and barked into the wood, and from down the hall Russ was making his sharp sound again, and the bathroom door opened, and Dolores came out into the hall with her cardigan half on, one arm not through the sleeve, her face wide open. What in the world is he barking at? Is it that coyote? Greg. She stopped. Greg, your arm. So there's my name. She got it out of me the way she gets everything out of everyone, by being in the room and needing to know. Greg. I've been Greg my whole life. Greg the barber from out on the county road. Greg who married Carol Walker and moved into her family's old house and stayed in it. Greg who took her father in after the stroke because there wasn't anybody else and because Carol would have wanted it. If Carol were still here, which she has not been for going on 2 years now. And that's a thing I'm not going to lay out for you in detail, because it has nothing to do with this night and everything to do with why I am the particular way I am, about not letting go of people, about not leaving anyone behind in a house. It's not the coyote. The red line on my forearm had widened to a smear. The pressing against the door had stopped, which was almost worse than when it hadn't. Dolores, I need you to stay back from the windows. Both windows in front. Stay clear of them. From the windows. Greg, why on earth? What's gotten into the dog? What's out there? Banjo had gone quiet again. He stood with his nose pressed to the gap under the front door, his whole back end tucked low and tight, and a sound came out of him I'd heard maybe once in his life. A high, thin whine threaded all the way through a low growl. 2 things a dog isn't supposed to do at the same time. And it lifted the hair on my arms, because it was fear, plain animal fear, in a dog who an hour earlier had been barking at nothing on principle. Come away from the door, buddy. Come on. I didn't grab for him. I'd learned that already, the hard way, on my own arm. You don't grab a frightened dog at the door. Come back here. Come back to me. He wouldn't. Outside, the porch light clicked off. It does that after a few minutes without motion. The click of it going dark meant the thing on the steps had gone still. I stood in my own front hall in my socks, with my heart hammering, and listened to the house. Russ's TV down the hall, the woman who couldn't finish her sentences, turned too loud. The refrigerator's hum, Dolores breathing through her mouth the way she does when she's scared, the dog's whine, and I tried to assemble a plan out of those parts and found I didn't have the materials. Here's what I knew. There was a man there, had been a man named Dale Foster on my front porch who had walked through a fence and crawled across my yard, and was not, by any meaning of the word I'd had until 20 minutes ago, all right? Something was happening at the hospital 40 miles off. Bad enough that a woman on the news couldn't make it to the end of a sentence about it. Roy Tillman had stopped a ball game on the AM dial, my cousin Sean's texts, which I hadn't even looked at yet, and Banjo, who would not stop reacting to whatever moved out there in the dark, and whose reacting was loud, and whose loudness was bringing it to us. I got my phone off the counter. The screen was crowded, a weather alert, which it never pushes after dark this time of year. A message from the school district's emergency all-call system. Russ is on the list from some senior outreach program, and it had texted his number, which is to say the house that began per-county emergency management and cut off because it was too long for the preview. And 3 texts from Sean down in town. The newest, just don't go outside, and before that, lock everything. And before that, a row of mashed letters like he'd butt-dialed me a paragraph from inside his pocket. I called him. It rang twice and went to nothing. Not voicemail. Just nothing. An empty open line and then dead. I called again and it didn't even ring. Gave me a fast, stuttering busy signal I hadn't heard since I was a kid trying to call a radio station. Greg, who are you calling? What is going on? You have to tell me something. Dolores had her hand on my arm now, right over the scrape, not noticing, gripping. Is it Russell's heart? Is it the... It's not Russ. Russ is fine. Russ is in his chair. I set the phone down on the counter, face up. The hospital. The all-call. Dale Foster's flat, aimed eyes. The dog at the door. I made myself stack it up, brick on brick, and the stack didn't fall into any shape I recognized, but it leaned all in one direction, and the direction it leaned was bad. Dolores, I need you to do a couple things and not ask me why yet. Can you do that for me? Just for a few minutes. She is 78 years old, my wife's mother, and when she's frightened, she takes a handkerchief out of her sleeve and folds it into quarters, and then quarters again, until it's a hard little square she works in her fist. She had it out now, folding, but she nodded. Go turn off Russ's television, and the radio in the kitchen. No, leave the radio, turn it down low, all the way down, and the lamps, the front room lamps and the hall light. I want this house dark from the outside looking in. And I need it quiet. Quiet. She looked at the dog. So did I. There it was, sitting in the front hall between us, the whole problem of the night, and neither of us would say it out loud. The thing that nobody who has ever loved a dog will let themselves finish thinking. I felt the size of it land on me, and I shoved it down into the same dark place I'd shoved the door marked nothing you have ever seen, and I went to deal with the parts of the problem I could stand to handle. I'll tell you about the hours that followed, because the hours that followed are where the whole night really lived. In the small, careful management of an old house and 2 old people, and a dog that could not be made quiet, while outside in the dark, the yard filled slowly up with more of what Dale Foster had become. I got the front lamps off, and the hall light, working by feel. I got the kitchen radio turned down until you'd have to put your ear against the speaker to catch it, and I left it there, on, because Roy Tillman was still talking, and Roy Tillman talking meant the world was still out there somewhere being the world. Then I went down to Russ's room. He didn't want the television off. He wanted the woman with the careful voice to finish one sentence, just one, the whole way to the end. And I understood that it's the most human want there is, to hear the end of the sentence. I crouched down in front of his chair and took his good hand in both of mine and put my face close to his and said low, Russ, there's something outside the house. Something bad. I need it dark in here and I need it quiet. Quiet like the deer stand. You remember, like when we'd take Banjo out to the stand before light, and you'd put your hand flat on my chest to tell me to hush. Quiet like that. Russ had been a hunting man his whole life before the stroke, before Carol got sick, before any of it, and the words deer stand reached him in a place the news couldn't get to. His face cleared. He nodded, slow, and let me take the remote and shut the TV off, and the room went dark and quiet. And Russ pointed at the window and then touched his own ear and looked at me asking. I nodded. He understood. He settled back in the chair and went still in the particular way an old hunter goes still, a stillness with attention all through it. And it hurt to look at, because it was so much the man he'd been, surfacing whole through the wreckage the stroke had left. The dog would not leave the front door. I tried everything I had that didn't involve putting my hands on him. I got the green bag of kibble, the lamb and rice he's been on since his stomach turned sensitive a couple years back. And I shook it. And that sound has called him in from the far corner of the property at a flat run more times than I can count. He flicked one ear. He didn't turn his head. I got the rubber chicken, the squeaky one Carol bought him as a pup that he has somehow never destroyed because he loves it too much to bite down hard. And I squeezed it. And the squeak went off in the dark, quiet house like a scream. And Dolores jerked in her chair. And I shoved the thing in a drawer, ashamed, because I had just made the exact mistake I was trying to keep the dog from making. I had made noise. He won't come, Dolores said from the wingback chair in the darkest corner of the front room, her square of handkerchief going around and around in her fingers. Carol's dog never would, once he'd set his mind to a thing. You remember after she passed? He sat out on that porch 3 days and wouldn't, and she caught herself and pulled back from the edge of it, the way she does, leaving the sentence open. He set his mind. He had set his mind. That's a real thing in a dog, and you cannot argue him out of it once he has. And what his mind was set on was the dark on the other side of the door, where there was now, I was fairly certain, more than one of them. I'd gone to the front window exactly once, kneeling below the sill and lifting the bottom corner of the curtain a finger's width, and the yard under the half moon had things in it that moved. I counted what I could and made it 4, maybe 5, and then I made myself quit counting, because the counting was just a way of not thinking, and I needed the thinking. They weren't bunched at the porch. They were spread across the whole front yard, the way men spread out when they're hunting for where a sound came from and can't fix the spot. One stood by the maple with its head cocked over at an angle. One was down at the broken fence, just standing in the gap, swaying. One was on the bottom step, close enough to see a woman, in what might have been scrubs, pale. Her face turned toward the door, toward the dog, who stood 4 inches away from her on the other side of 1.5 inches of old oak, breathing his fear out into the gap under it. They were hunting the dog was hunting them, both of them at it through the door, and the door the only thing in the world between. Around what I'd guess was 10 by Russ's wall clock with the glowing hands, the woman on the step put her hands on the door. Banjo lost it. There is no gentler way to say it. Whatever last thread had been holding him to me snapped clean, and he went up on his hind legs and slammed both front paws into the door and bayed, full voice, the deer bay and the man-at-night bay, and something underneath both of them I had never heard before. And it filled the whole house and went out of the house. I could feel it going out, like throwing every window open at once. And out in the yard, the swaying ones stopped swaying. Through the curtain corner, I watched them turn. All of them, every one, toward the sound, the way iron filings swing to a magnet. They turned, and then they came. Banjo, Banjo, off, off! I had him by the collar and the scruff both, dragging him back off the door, and he was a different animal in my hands, 60 pounds of pure refusal, and his head twisted around. And this time it wasn't a scrape. This time his teeth closed on the base of my thumb for half a second before he knew it was me and let go. And the white pain of it was almost a relief, because a dog biting the hand that grabs him in a fight is a thing I understood, a thing that belonged to the old world that had ended sometime around supper. I hauled him into the little hall bathroom, the one with no window and one door. And I went in with him and pulled the door shut behind us both, and sat down on the cold floor with my back against the door, and got both arms and both legs around him and held on. It was the only room in the house with no window and only one way in. I'd picked it without knowing I was picking it. The walls were thick old plaster over wood lath, and the door was a real door, solid through, not the hollow ones in the rest of the house. If I could keep him in here, the sound would be smaller. That was the whole of the plan, and it wasn't much, and it was the best I had. He fought me a long while. I won't make it sound like anything other than what it was, a man on a bathroom floor in the dark, wrestling a terrified animal he loved. He twisted and dug his nails into the tile, and once the back of his skull caught me across the mouth, and I tasted blood from my own lip. And the whole time he barked. But the little room ate some of it. The plaster and the closed door took some of it down, and after a while I had no clock. I wasn't taking an arm off him to find my phone after a while. The fight began to go out of him. Not because he'd given up, because no animal alive can hold that pitch forever. The barks came farther apart, and then they were the high whine again, and then he was just shaking against my chest in the pitch dark, panting, and I had my mouth pressed to the top of his head where the fur is softest, and I was saying things that weren't words, the sounds you make at a baby, and I could feel his heart going against the inside of my arm like a thing trying to beat its way out of him. Through the wall and the door and the whole length of the house I could hear them at the front now. The pressing, the slow weight against the wood and the glass. And then glass, the storm window over the front door. The old wavy glass that came with the house going, not in a clean smash but in a long grinding crack, as something leaned its full weight into it, and the lead came apart strand by strand. Dolores was in the front room. Russ was at the far back of the house in his chair. I could not be in 3 places. That's the thing nobody tells you about being the only one whose body still does what he asks of it. The only one who drives, who has the keys, who knows the roads. Everyone you love is somewhere else in the dark, and you are one man. And the arithmetic of it is cruel, and it is simple. And I hated it on that bathroom floor more than I have ever hated a true thing. Dolores in the front room with the front door coming apart. Russ at the back. The dog in my arms who would start it all up again the instant I let go of him. The sound, the gathering, the leaning weight. Dolores. I said it through the door, low, pitched to carry just to her. Dolores, can you hear me? I hear you. Her screen door voice gone thin and high. Greg, there's a face at the window. There's a face looking in. It's the Reyes girl. Little Sophia Reyes from the pharmacy counter. She rang up my pills not 2 weeks ago. She carried them out to the car for me. What is wrong with her? Why won't she? Don't talk to it. Dolores. Listen to me now. Don't talk to it and don't go near it. Can you get yourself down the hall to Russ's room? Low and quiet. Stay below the windows and go to Russ. Can you do that for me? A long pause. The grinding crack from the front. Banjo's whole body going tight against my arms at the sound of her getting up. I can do that, she said. And I heard the old wingback let her go and her own old knees. And I heard her shuffle, low, the way I'd asked, down the hall. And I heard Russ's door. And then I heard the two of them, the old man and the old woman, his sharp sound, and her soft answer to it, and then quiet from that end of the house. And I let out a breath I'd been holding so long that spending it hurt my chest. The front of the house kept coming apart, slow and patient, and I sat on the bathroom floor with the dog, and I finally let myself think the thought I'd been refusing since the porch light first clicked on, because there was nothing left in front of me to do but think it. We could not stay. The house had been the plan. The unspoken, unthought default plan. The thing every person does on instinct. You go inside, you lock the door, you wait for morning, for the sheriff, for the world to climb back into a shape that makes sense. But the front door was failing, and there was no version of this night in which the dog stayed quiet. And a quiet dog was the only thing that could have made staying possible. And I was not going to make the dog quiet by the means the cold, reasonable part of my mind kept laying out for me, patient as a salesman, coming back to the same closed door every 20 minutes. I had a hammer in the garage. I had Russ's old gun in the back of the closet. The cold part of my mind knew exactly where both were and exactly what they were for, and I would not. I had buried too much already inside this house. I'd buried the whole halving of Carol in these rooms, and I was not going to add the dog to the list of things this house had taken from me, just so the house could keep me one more night, just so the walls could hold a little longer. So if we couldn't stay, we had to go. And going meant the van. The van is a high-top wheelchair van, a Ford that got converted through the program when Russ came home from the rehab place. Because there is no getting a man who can't reliably work his right side in and out of a regular car twice a day without ruining both your backs. It has a ramp that folds out the side door and a winch and floor tie-downs for the chair. And it sits nose out in the detached garage, 40 feet from the back door across the open concrete pad. 40 feet. The same pad Dale Foster had crawled across on his hands and knees. 40 feet of open, dark ground, to be crossed by a man who half works and a woman who shuffles and a dog who could not be carried in silence. To reach a van I would have to load using a ramp that whirred and clunked, while the whole yard searched itself for the source of any sound. I sat with that for a while. The dog had gone almost still against me. His eyes were open in the dark. I could feel him blinking against my forearm. And every little while a tremor ran the length of him, and a sound would start to build in his chest, and I'd lay my hand flat on his ribs, and the sound would stop. He trusted me to be the thing that held it down. That's what I keep coming back to. That he trusted me to be the one who held it down, and I couldn't promise him I'd keep being that. Because the only road out of the house ran straight through the one thing in him he could not help. I got my phone out, slow, one arm still around the dog, and the screen lit the little room blue and his eyes flashed green in it. There was a fresh message on the all-call thread, and this one I read all the way through, because I had the time now and nothing else to do but read. Per County Emergency Management. Residents of Pell and adjacent counties are directed to shelter in place. Do not approach affected individuals. Do not attempt to render aid. National Guard and state resources are being directed to designated collection points. The nearest collection point for this service area is Pell County High School, located on County Road 12. Approach from the north. Do not travel after dark unless directed to do so. This message will repeat. Pell County High School. I knew it the way I knew everything in this county. The way you know the only place you've ever lived. It sat up on the rise where County Road 12 ran along above the town, 8 miles from my back door if you took the river road, which I would not take, because the river road runs down the draw and the draw funnels everything toward the water. And tonight, the water was where the worst of it would be pooling. 10 miles if you went out to Route 9 and came at the school the long way through town, which I also would not do, because town was where Sean's texts had come from, and town, by the long stops in Roy Tillman's voice, was not a place you drove into tonight. But there was a third way. There is always a third way out here if you grew up on these roads with nothing to do but learn them. You could run up Quail Run to where it dead ends at the old Hartley Orchard, and there's a gravel track the orchard trucks use that cuts through to County Road, 12 above the town, above the river, and comes at the high school from the backside, the north side, the side the message said to approach from. Nobody used that track but the orchard and the teenagers who parked up there to be alone. It would be black dark and tight and rutted, and I'd be threading a high-top van down a lane built for a flatbed, but it kept me off the river road and out of town and pointed the right direction. That was the plan then, such as it was. Out the back, across the pad to the garage, load them, take Quail Run to the Hartley track to County Road 12, and come at the school from the north. I only had to get 60 feet of old people and one terrified dog across open ground without the dog calling the whole yard down on top of us. I'd like to tell you I solved that. I didn't solve it. I made it a little less impossible than it was, and then I ran out of time to make it any better, which is how nearly everything goes when it matters. What I did was this. I took off my flannel shirt, there in the dark of the bathroom, and I tied it over Banjo's head. Not his muzzle, not tight. Over his ears and around, loose the way you hood a hawk. There was an old man named Ott, who used to come into the shop on Saturdays for a trim he didn't need, just to sit. And he'd told me once about a bird dog of his that wouldn't hold still in the blind, and how he learned to hood it. Because a dog that can't see and can't hear clean is a dog whose mind has less to throw itself against. I didn't have a hood. I had a flannel shirt and a scared dog and 40 feet of open ground. I tied it gentle and Banjo let me, past fighting now, and his breathing changed under it, slowed and deepened, the way Ott swore it would. And I clipped his leash to his collar and wrapped the leash twice around my fist until it cut. Then I went and got the others up and ready, one room at a time, in the dark, quiet. I'm going to move past some of it, because some of it is just the slow, terrible labor of getting two old people up out of their chairs and onto their feet and moving through a dark house without lights and without words. Dolores with her hand hooked in the back of my belt, and Russ between us, his good arm slung over my shoulders, his dead right foot dragging and catching on the floor, and every drag and every catch a sound, and every sound a thing that could turn a head in the yard. I'm going to move past the part where Russ understood, completely, what we were doing and where we were going and what we were leaving, and stopped at the door of his room and reached back with his good left hand and laid his palm flat against the doorframe a moment, the way a man touches a thing he knows he won't come back to, and made a sound that was not a word and did not need to be one. I'm going to move past it because I can't tell it slow without coming apart, and there wasn't time to come apart. We got to the kitchen. We got to the back door. The dog was hooded and leashed and pressed warm against my leg, shaking, silent. Dolores had her square of handkerchief and her grip on my belt. Russ had his good hand on my shoulder. The front of the house had gone quiet again, which meant they'd given up on the front door for now, which meant they were somewhere I couldn't see, and the somewhere I couldn't see was worse than any somewhere I could. I put my hand on the back doorknob and looked through the little window in the door at the dark pad and the darker bulk of the garage 40 feet off, and I couldn't see anything moving, and I knew that meant nothing. When I open this, I said, low, to all of them, to the dog, to myself, we go straight across to the garage side door, and we don't stop and we don't talk, no matter what happens. Dolores, you stay on his right, hold his belt. I've got his arm, and I've got the dog. We move slow, but we do not stop. If I say down, You get down right where you are, and you stay down. You understand me." "I understand you," Dolores said. The handkerchief vanished into her fist. Russ squeezed my shoulder once, hard. The old hunter's signal, ready. I opened the door. The night came in cool and full of the river smell, and the spring peepers were going down in the draw, which they had no business doing, which meant the world had decided to go right on being the world even on a night like this one. Frogs singing in the wet low places the same as every April there had ever been. And I stepped out onto the pad with the dog tight against my leg and Russ's weight coming down on my shoulder and Dolores's breath at my back. And we went. 40 feet. I have walked it 10,000 times in my life. In every weather, half asleep, both arms full of groceries. It is nothing. With a man who half works and a shuffling woman and a hooded dog on a cutting leash. It was the longest open ground I have ever crossed, and we were maybe halfway level with the dead clothesline, when Russ's dragging foot caught the lip of the old garden border, the railroad ties Carol laid down 20 years back to keep the bed from spilling into the grass, and he went down. He went down quiet. I'll give the old hunter that, a grunt, and the soft, heavy sound of a body settling into grass, nothing more. But Dolores gasped. She couldn't help it. The man falling pulled it straight out of her, a sharp, small breath. And the gasp was a tiny thing, smaller than a bark, smaller than the squeak of a rubber chicken. And over by the dark maple, something that had been standing still came unstill and turned, and started toward us across the yard, fast, that hands and knees impossible fast, that Dale Foster had moved with. And behind it, 2 more rose up out of the wild grass at the fence where they'd been down over something on the ground. And the dog against my leg felt all of it, smelled it, or heard it through the flannel, or simply knew it the way he'd known about Dale before any of us. And Banjo began to bark. It came up through him like water forced up a pipe, and I clamped my hand over the flannel where his muzzle was under it. Not to hurt him. Just pressure, just please, buddy, please. And he barked into my palm, muffled. And I got my other hand into Russ's armpit and hauled. And somehow the old man got his good leg under himself, and we were up and moving again, dragging now. All pretense of slow burned away. The garage looming, the side door. And the thing from the maple was 20 feet behind us, 15. And the dog was barking into my hand and twisting against the leash, and the leather was cutting into my fist. And I hit the garage side door with my shoulder, and it banged open, and I shoved Dolores through into the black, and dragged Russ through after, and the dog and I came through last, and I kicked the door shut, and there was no lock on it. There had never been a lock on the inside garage door. Why would a man put a lock on the inside of his own garage door? And I put my back against it, and braced my feet on the workbench, bolted to the floor, and held it. The thing hit the door. Once hard. And the door bucked against my spine, and I pushed back into it. And it held. And the dog tore the flannel half off his head, and stood in the pitch dark of the garage facing the door I was holding, and barked at it full voice, no muffle left. And there was no holding him now. There was no bathroom now. There was only the van and the bucking door, and the thing on the far side of it, and now the others coming. I could hear them coming through the dark, drawn by him, drawn by all of it, the engine I hadn't started yet and the bark I couldn't stop. "Get in the van!" There was no point whispering now. There was no point in any of it now. "Dolores, the side door, the ramp buttons, the orange one. Slap the orange button. Russ, go, go, get up the ramp." The ramp motor whirred and clunked. That exact sound I'd dreaded crossing the whole 40 feet to avoid making, folding itself out into the dark. And it didn't matter anymore. because the dog had already told them precisely where we were. Dolores got Russ to the ramp, and the two of them went up it, slow, so terribly slow, into the black inside of the van. And behind me the door bucked again as a second weight hit it, and my socked feet slid on the smooth concrete. And I knew I had maybe 4 more seconds of being a door before I stopped being one. "Banjo! Van! Up! Up! Get up there!" And the dog and I will love this animal until the day I die. The dog broke off from the door he wanted so badly to fight and came to me. Came to my voice, the one thread that held after everything else had snapped. I got off the door with the leash wrapped in my fist, and the door slammed inward behind me, and I didn't look back at it. I ran the 4 steps to the van's side door, hauling the dog, and threw him up the ramp ahead of me and went up after him and slapped the flat of my hand on the orange button. And the ramp began to fold up, slow, the motor whirring, and a hand came over the rising lip of it, pale, a gold band. A watch face turned to the inside of the wrist, and I put the sole of my foot against that wrist and shoved with everything I had. And the ramp folded the last of the way up, and the side door sealed shut with a solid pneumatic sound that was, I think, the finest sound I have ever heard in my life. Then I was in the driver's seat, and the keys were in the cup holder where I always leave them, where Carol taught me to always leave them so we'd never be standing in the driveway, in the rain, hunting through pockets. Thank God. Thank Carol. And I had the engine turning over, and it caught, and the headlights came on and lit up the whole inside of the garage. The workbench, the rakes hung on their nails. Carol's old blue bicycle with the flat back tire she never got around to fixing. And the garage door down in front of me closed, and no time at all to get out and lift it by hand. And so I didn't. I put the van in drive, and I put my foot down, and I drove us straight through it. The door came off its track with a great tearing crash of buckling aluminum and folding panels, and we were out into the night, the headlights swinging across the yard and catching them in the beams. More than I had counted from the window, 6 of them, 8. Faces I half knew and would not let myself fully know, and every one of them turned toward the engine and the lights now. The engine and the lights so much louder and brighter than any dog, and I cranked the wheel and swung the van around the side of the house with the tires tearing furrows in Carol's lawn, and Dolores cried out from the back as Russ slid against the straps. And I found the driveway, and the driveway found the road. And I put the high beams on and aimed us down the long, dark throat of Quail Run. In the mirror, the house sat there with its torn open garage and its dark windows and its broken front door hanging in the frame. And figures came around the corners of it into the red wash of my taillights, slow and pale. And then the road curved, and a stand of cedars came between us and took the house away. And that was the last I saw of it. The house Carol grew up in. The house I'd carried her father out of in the dark, going small and red, and then gone behind the trees. Nobody said anything for a long time. The peepers were behind us now. There was only the engine and the road unrolling in the headlights, and Banjo, who had climbed up into the passenger seat without being asked, the flannel still hanging off one ear, sitting up and panting and looking out the windshield at the road with me, and every little while a tremor still rolling through him from his nose to his tail. I put my right hand on his back, between his shoulders, and he leaned his weight into it, and I drove with one hand and kept the other on the dog. "Is he—" Dolores's voice came up out of the dark behind me finally. "Is Russell? Are you whole? Did it get you? Did it—" A sharp sound from Russ. Then, with an effort I could hear, dredged up syllable by syllable from whatever deep well he still had under the washed-out bridge, One whole, clear word. Fine. He'd been working at it the whole time, I think, ever since the fall, hauling that one word up out of the well to hand to her. Fine. Dolores made a sound, half a laugh and half something else, and I heard the rustle of her finding his good hand in the dark and folding both of hers around it. And they rode like that, the old man and the old woman, hand in hand in the dark of a wheelchair van going up a county road away from everything they'd ever owned. Quail Run ran out at the Hartley orchard the way it always had, the trees standing in their long, dark rows, the smell of them coming through the vents even with the windows up, that green apple leaf smell that has nothing in it of anything bad. I found the mouth of the gravel track by feel and by memory, the tires going from blacktop to gravel with that loose, grinding change in sound. And I slowed the van way down, because the track was tight and rutted and built for a flatbed, and not for a high-top van. And I needed both hands and all of my eyes for it. The headlights bounced and swung through the apple trees as the van rocked over the ruts. Somewhere up ahead and above us, 8 dark miles off, was the rise where the high school sat, where the recorded message said there were lights, the guard, a place that could hold us, or where there wasn't. The message had said this message will repeat, and it had repeated. And a recording repeating into the dark is not the same thing as a man standing in a lit doorway, telling you to come in, you're safe now, you made it. I knew that. I'd known it since Roy Tillman first stopped in the middle of a sentence and played a hymn instead of finishing it. But the track ran toward it, and toward it was the only direction left that wasn't behind us. And so I drove us toward it, slow, through the dark trees, my hand on the dog. I thought about the things I'd left in the house, Carol's bicycle in the garage I'd driven through, the photographs, her father's hunting rifle in the back of the closet that I'd refused to go get, that I'd left there on purpose so I wouldn't have to choose what the cold, reasonable part of me wanted to use it for. The kibble bag standing open on the kitchen counter. The radio still murmuring Roy Tillman to an empty house. If Roy was even still on the air. If there was anyone left in that little station to keep the lights on long as I can, the way he'd promised. I thought about Dale Foster's watch turned to the inside of his wrist, and Sophia Reyes, who'd carried Dolores's pills out to the car. And I made myself stop thinking about the faces, the same way I'd made myself stop counting them at the window, because thinking about the faces was a thing that would take both my hands off the wheel, and I didn't have both hands to spare. One was on the dog, the track climbed. The apple trees thinned out toward the top of the orchard, where the ground broke over the ridge, and ahead of us, the dark opened up into more dark, the sky a shade lighter than the land under it. And somewhere down to the right and below would be the river and the town and all the rest of it. Then Banjo's ears came up, both of them. Even the bad one that never stands, it came all the way up and forward. And he lifted his head off the seat and stopped panting and looked out through the windshield into the dark beyond where the headlights reached, up the track where it crested the ridge, and a sound began low in his chest. The deer bay, the man at night bay, that down in the chest sound he made when there was something out there that the rest of us couldn't see yet. The sound he'd made on the back steps an hour or 100 years ago, when the whole world was still the world, and a dog refusing to come up the steps, was the strangest thing about the evening. I eased my foot off the gas. The van slowed on the gravel. I put my hand flat on his collar, gentle, the way I had on the bathroom floor, and I felt the sound building under his fur. And I looked out the windshield where the dog was looking, up the track to where it crested into the open dark, and I let the van roll us forward, slow, toward whatever it was he'd already found out there ahead of us in the night. Structural summary.